This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. The title Father of the Nation is an especially prestigious one. It has been extended to a very select few throughout history. One of the most prominent figures to receive this honor in the modern period is a man whose name literally means Father of the Turks. After leading a successful war of independence against various foreign powers, Ataturk was confronted by the prospect of having to forge a new state out of the ruins of the Ottoman Empire. This nation would be forced to embark upon a radically different course than its predecessor. Ataturk, never one to shy away from a challenge, would transform Turkish society in a way that could hardly have been imagined by its citizens. No longer consumed by the thought of a war, the Turkish nationalist movement quickly moved to mould the country according to its political vision. Perhaps the best way to understand Ataturk's presidency and his political vision is to go through the 6 arrows, the official ideology of the new republic, and see how each one interplays with the various reforms he introduced. Republicanism. This emphasized the liberty of citizens and the idea of popular sovereignty, which stated that the Turkish people were the source of political power and that the authority of the government and state were rooted in the consent of its people. But in reality, Ataturk's government was hardly representative. The Kemalist Republican People's Party held power in what essentially became a one-party state. In many ways, the Kemalist vision was enforced on the Turkish people without asking for their say-so. This took place despite there being contrarian opinions within the Grand National Assembly. Even in 1924, a breakaway party, the Progressive Republican Party, was formed by some of Ataturk's closest associates, including General Karabekir. The disaffected members agreed in principle with Kemalism, but wanted a slightly more conservative approach to socio-cultural change. In 1930, Ataturk asked his longtime friend Ali Fethi Okyar to form a new party so that a multi-party system could be inaugurated once again. Both occasions resulted in the same thing. Ataturk forced both parties to dissolve because he feared that the opening up of political power would be used by the forces of conservatism, especially the Islamists, to undo or even delay the modernist-inclined reforms intended by the government. The totalitarian nature of Ataturk's government meant that the very privacy of ordinary people was under threat. In the modern context, this issue is even more worrisome due to the internet, where our personal information is on the front line. This is where today's sponsor can help, Surfshark VPN. VPNs are designed to keep our online identity safe by encrypting the information sent between our devices and the internet. Recently, I've found myself traveling a lot, and so I've had to rely upon free public Wi-Fi a fair amount. Unfortunately, I've come to learn that this is a prime opportunity for hackers to steal my personal information. But now with Surfshark's Clean Web feature, I won't have to worry too much about that, since it blocks trackers, malware, and phishing attempts. With Surfshark VPN, you'll be able to not only prevent your personal data from falling into the hands of cyber criminals, you'll also be able to change your virtual location as well, thus giving you uncensored access to the internet. If you want to watch content but are blocked because of your location, Surfshark allows you to easily change your IP address and access your favorite content. And to top it off, Surfshark allows you to use one account on an unlimited number of devices. It really is a comprehensive protection plan for your online privacy. So if, like me, you spend a lot of your time using the internet, Surfshark VPN services are a must-have. They've been good enough to allow Hikmah History subscribers an extra 3 months for free with the promo code Hikmah. Just go to surfshark.deals/Hikmah, the link is also in the description below. And remember, they have a 30-day money-back guarantee, meaning there's no risk in trying it out. So don't delay in not only protecting your personal information, but gaining unrestricted access to the internet. Populism. Nimutlu Turkum diyen, how happy is the one who says I'm a Turk. Ataturk was particularly fond of this phrase, and it helps to explain his views on populism too. This concept aimed to shift political power to the Turkish citizenry and asserted that national identity came before everything else. In this sense, it was pitted against the Sufi tariqas and Islamic madrasas, with both being institutions that believed in a higher power, therefore placing Islam above the nation. The desire to subsume potential rival strands of thought under the umbrella of the state also saw madrasas come under the supervision of the Ministry of Education. This particular issue was most obviously addressed with the abolition of the Ottoman Khilafah in March 1924. The political functions of the Sultanate had already been abolished in 1922, but the fact that Khalif Abdulmajid II still held the prestige associated with his office was seen by the Kemalists as potentially undermining the authority of the government because it placed another institution above the nation state. As surprising as it may sound today, when Ataturk first came to power, there were some Turks who believed that they'd have a political system that was closer to the one created by the first Khalifs in the 7th century. The following Kemalist principle would show them just how wrong they were. Laïcism. Contrary to some softer forms of secularism, which deal largely with separating religion and governance, Laïcism called for religion to be relegated to the private instead of the public sphere. In this sense, religion was discouraged from not only getting involved in government affairs, its role was to be undermined in society as well. This created the foundation block for much of the social reforms Ataturk would introduce. Of course, this was very different from the centuries-old Ottoman model, which relied heavily on Sharia law to guide its legal matters. Already in the Tanzimat and Second Constitutional Era, Ottoman statesmen had tried to wean themselves off a religiously inspired political model. But Ataturk kicked that process into another gear, closing down Sufi lodges, abolishing the Khilafah, shutting down Sharia courts, and replacing the Ottoman-era position of Shaykhul Islam, the person responsible for religious matters, with the newly established Directorate of Religious Affairs, which came under the direct supervision of the government. The Ottoman legal code, the Mejel, which was based off the Sharia, was abandoned in favor of a blend of different European legal codes that were imported. The day of rest was changed from the traditional Friday to Sunday, yet again mirroring Europe. Wearing the fez was banned in 1925 as part of Ataturk's so-called hat revolution. Because of its attachment to the Ottomans, the fez was viewed as a symbol of backwardness, which is fascinating since the rationale for the fez's introduction in the first place in the 1820s was that it replaced the turban and symbolized the Ottomans' desire to modernize. Sartorial changes were continued in 1934 when a law was passed which banned wearing religious clothing outside places of worship. In 1928, there was an amendment to the constitution which removed Islam as the state religion altogether. It is important to try to understand why Ataturk's outlook on political Islam was so antagonistic. For him and many other reformers, the Ottoman decline could be explained through their lack of desire to keep up with the rapid modernization pursued by European powers. As a result, reliance upon Islam in the political and cultural sphere was interpreted by Ataturk as an obstacle to progress and as a weapon of dogma and ignorance. During the 19th and 20th centuries, reformers in the Islamic world across the ideological spectrum had grappled with this issue, with two main schools of thoughts emerging. There were the Islamists and modernists. Ataturk was clearly from the latter, but it should be noted that the Islamists also expressed dismay at the way in which Islam was being utilized as a socio-political force, with many great thinkers such as Sheikh Muhammad Abduh berating the ignorance which had spread across the Dar al-Islam and allowed European imperialism to triumph. But their solution was to get back to a better and more accurate understanding of Islam, instead of moving away from it and towards the European-styled cultural reforms that the modernists such as Ataturk favoured. Nationalism. The Kemalist view of nationalism rested heavily on civic nationhood. This puts forth the idea that a nation is defined by its political institutions and liberal values, which are to be upheld by its citizens. Civic nationalism is often contrasted with ethnic nationalism, which defines the nations in terms of ethnicity, in a similar vein to Pan-Turkism. Herein lays a contradiction between Kemalist theory and practice, because Ataturk's views clearly drew inspiration from ethnic nationalism too. Turkish culture and history were pedestalized and prioritized above the identities of the other minorities in the country. The Turkish Historical Society was established in 1931 to explore the great heritage left behind by Turkic cultures in the past. The institution was regarded by some as a mouthpiece for Kemalism, which makes sense considering their endorsement of the Turkish history thesis, the idea that Turks had moved from their ancestral homeland in Central Asia and brought civilization wherever they went. This assumption went hand in hand with an even more far-fetched idea known as the Sun language theory, which argued that all human languages were descendants of an original Turkic language. Ataturk's notion of nationality encouraged his citizens to view being Turk as a legal term expressing their citizenship of Turkey, as opposed to an ethnic designation. All the ethnic groups living inside of Turkey were to think of themselves as Turks and Turks only. Whilst on the surface this may seem harmless and even inclusive, in practice this represented an attack on the identities of the Circassians, Greeks, and numerous other minorities. All these groups were forced to go through a process of Turkification, whereby they'd be forcefully assimilated as Turks. One ethnic group has particularly suffered from Ataturk's vision of a nation, and that's the Kurds, the largest ethnic minority in the country. Constituting up to 20% of the population, they make up a majority in many of Turkey's eastern provinces. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, thousands of Kurds in the east were forcefully deported to other areas of Anatolia, whilst Turks were also settled in Kurdish regions, all in an effort to undermine the very infrastructure of Kurdish society. Ataturk was convinced that in order for the nation to be stable and unified, ethnic and cultural distinctions had to be done away with in the search for a unitary political and cultural identity for Turkey. So the Kurds saw their customs and identity come under direct attack. The Kurdish language was banned in the public sphere, deportations were used, and the secular policies of the Kemalist government was internalized by many Kurds as an attack on their traditional Islamic values. Not willing to simply accept the denial of their identity, the 1920s and 30s witnessed three large-scale Kurdish uprisings in the eastern provinces. There was the Sheikh Said Rebellion of 1925, the Ararat Rebellion of 1927 to 1930, and the Dersim Rebellion in 1937. All of them caused major concern for the government in Ankara and were only put down with significant effort and resources from the Turkish army. Reformism. This placed emphasis on the need to replace the traditional institutions and values with modern ones. As a result of Ataturk's obsessive focus on modernity, Turkey was going to be actively modified by reform in order to be the most effective it could be. Naturally, this necessitated a very acrimonious break from the past. In truth, however, this break was not as radical as it seems. From the 1830s onwards, there was lively discourse on a wide range of socio-political reforms in the late Ottoman political scene. Regardless, however, Ataturk viewed it as necessary to portray the Ottomans as backwards for his political vision. Some of the well-known changes he introduced were justified by the Kemalist principle of reformism. Perhaps the most famous of these include his reform of the alphabet. Viewing the traditional Arabic script of Ottoman Turkish as too complex and faced with a population that was largely illiterate, in 1928 Ataturk sponsored the introduction of a new alphabet for the Turkish language that was to use the Latin script. He would follow this up with further language reforms via the Turkish Language Association, which sought to replace Arabic and Persian loanwords with Turkish equivalents. Within society, he disagreed with the traditional segregation of genders that many Islamic societies upheld, instead viewing women's involvement in public affairs as essential. He passed numerous legislations that sought to equalize men and women's role in society in line with European customs, such as granting full political rights to women in 1934. That same year, the surname law was introduced, which required all citizens of Turkey to adopt a fixed hereditary surname. This is when he was given the name Ataturk. Done with the intention to modernize the country bureaucratically, this could also foster a sense of Turkishness within society, as all names related to other ethnicities were prohibited and forced to adopt Turkish renditions of them. Statism. The state was to have an important role in regulating the economy of the country. Turkey's economy at the start of the Republic was very underdeveloped. Almost a decade of constant war had severely damaged its financial infrastructure. The Ottoman Empire's debt to European creditors was still unpaid, so the new government inherited that. Seeing their hopes of gaining the city of Mosul and its oil-rich fields dashed, the Kemalists saw the need for the state's involvement in jump-starting the economy. This problem became especially pronounced in the aftermath of the Great Depression that shook the world. Despite these issues, Turkey's economy, both in the agricultural and industrial sectors, grew massively as a result of Ataturk's 5-year economic plans. Ataturk can be a confusing person to understand. He favoured a representative parliamentary democracy but enacted a one-party state. He championed rationality and empiricism but supported wild delusional ideas such as the Sun language theory. He rejected ethnic nationalism but indirectly sponsored it. I've found what helps me to understand Ataturk's views and actions is the term sovereignty. Throughout the course of his life, his homeland had been at the prey of other powers, the decaying of the Ottoman state, then the War of Independence. So as president, he shifted his attention to ensuring that the internal infrastructure of Turkey was sufficiently strong enough to withstand shocks and bring about a degree of stability that could then be used as a platform for progress, which in turn would further strengthen the nation state and continue to insulate its sovereignty from internal and external threats. Upon his death in November 1938, he left in his wake a young but assertive nation that has in some ways become a beacon of progress and strength in the Middle East. Having said that though, Turkey today finds itself having to answer unresolved issues regarding its very identity, specifically its relationship with Islam and how that clashes with its notion of progress and modernity. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you check out Surfshark VPN, the link is in the description below. As usual, big thank you to my patrons for continuing to support me. If you want to become a patron and help Hikmah History grow, check out the link in the description below. And last but not least, I want to thank my friend Azim for his help on this script. Until next time, peace!